instead undermines her enemies by identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them for personal gain. This is no clearer than during her introductory fight in Season 2 against Zuko, a scene designed to illuminate her character. She begins by playing Zuko's deepest insecurities of being unwanted, unloved, forgotten against him.
And he considers you a miserable failure for not finding the Avatar. We want you back home, except to lock you up where you can no longer embarrass him.
Zuko doesn't even use her firebending ability, despite being superior in skill, but immediately identifies Zuko's deepest insecurities and manipulates his anger and hurt into making him weaker, by first delaying his retreat from the battle, and second causing him to lose firebending form. Only in the last moment, when her opponent is at his weakest, does she strike. There also appears to be a glee for Azula that comes with inflicting pain and suffering on others, another hallmark of her psychology, sadism. This trait can be seen in her childhood, with Zuko pointing out how she interacts with others.
Hey Mom, wanna see how Azula feeds turtle ducks? Yes. Why would you do that?
This is markedly similar to the morbid and sadistic curiosity of young children who trap, burn, or kill insects or rodents for fun, a sign found in children who are often eventually diagnosed with a violent personality disorder. Even as a teenager, she does things such as destroy a sandcastle or child and rage at for seemingly no reason. This sadism is complemented by an unconventional sense of right and wrong. Though she does exhibit a moral framework we will discuss later, the notion of doing righteous things for righteousness' sake seems to be foreign to her. When Zuko becomes infuriated that he no longer knows the difference between right and wrong, she dismisses this as pathetic.
Because I'm not sure I know the difference between right and wrong anymore. You pathetic.
This part of her psychology too matches with her paramount focus on personal gain. The rigid moral framework of right and wrong that Zuko needs particularly when it comes to the age, power. At first, though we might identify these four traits with a kind of psychopath, the focus on interpersonal manipulation of personal gain, in Zuko's case, power, is more indicative of what is known as the Machiavellian personality type. In particular, she lacks the impulsivity that is commonly identified with psychopaths, as well as the tendency for emotional outbursts of rage, greed, and sadness to engage in violence. Her violence is more calculated and limited for the most part. This Machiavellian psychological framework is reinforced by a number of other basic
Hello, person who just joined. I'm just chilling.
In this light, Azula could be diagnosed with its counterpart, antisocial personality disorder under the DSM-5 criteria. Egocentrism directed at personal gain, a lack of pro-social internal standards, a low function of empathy, a degree of incapacity for mutually intimate relationships but relying on exploitation, and antagonism, made up of an especial focus on both manipulation and furthering one's goals, deceitfulness, and sadism. Though she does not immediately exhibit the factor of antagonism called hostility criteria, which is being prone to disproportionate outbursts for minor insults. Instead, her capacity for level-headed patience and manipulation means that she isn't prone to such outbursts for the most part. She also does not exhibit the strong trait of impulsivity that characterizes an antisocial personality disorder. What should be noted here is that all of these traits exist on a spectrum. Not all of those that have ASPD will show every sign. For Azula, sadism is a stronger trait, but for others, for many, impulsiveness is a stronger trait. But this is not the case for Azula. And while this behavior and mentality could be explained by ASPD, Azula also exhibits a number of traits that might suggest a narcissistic personality disorder. This is hallmarked by a lack of understanding that others are as fully human as oneself, that the interests and pains of those around them are as valid or legitimate. Part of this may come from Azula's position as royalty, being taught by her father such ideas that there is no right or wrong apart from what the Fire Lord decides. This is particularly true when it comes to her relating to commoners or servants whom she regards as inherently. But it also characterizes the relationships she has with those close to her socially. She sees herself as inherently more intelligent, beautiful, and perfect more than anyone else, to the point that she is puzzled as to why others don't see her this way during the beach.
But you're the most beautiful, smartest, perfect girl in the world. Well, you're right about all those things, but for some reason when I meet boys, they act as if I'm going to do something horrible to them.
By the things she chose and her desire to believe it. This too is reinforced by her lack of empathy and tendency to use those around her to satisfy her own needs without compassion. No one else can be as brilliant as her because no one else is as human as her. But the DSM-5 criteria for a significant impairment in self-functioning in a narcissistic personality disorder highlights one of the most fascinating parts of Azula's psychology: excessive reference to others for self-definition and self-esteem regulation. While goal setting is based on gaining approval from others, personal standards are unreasonably high in order to see oneself as exceptional. The second criteria here for an impairment in self-direction is clearly satisfied in the story. One of Azula's clearest personality traits is a deeply rooted need for personal perfection.
1 year almost isn't good enough.
This self-imposed standard is so entrenched in her mind that the scene designed to introduce her character to the audience uses it to define her character. But this first criteria is more interesting. When it comes to Azula, there are two types of approval to consider. The first is that natural human desire for intimacy with another, and the second is that detached need for superficial self-esteem and status to prop up one's identity externally. Each of these two needs arise from different power dynamics in Azula's relationships. Azula's relationship with her father is the only relationship in which the power dynamic is not pitted in her favor. Because of this, it is the only relationship in which she requires this first kind of approval, a genuine sense of love and affection. In contrast, in every other relationship, Azula is the one in power. Detached form of reverence, deference, and worship, a dynamic that involves manipulating and undermining others to be the most beautiful and smartest girl in the room.
I'm so used to people worshipping us. They should. Yes, I know, and I love it.
In light of this, Azula would satisfy this first part of the DSM-5 criteria, but we must ask the question that every viewer has had at the forefront of their mind when thinking about the true depths of Azula's psychology. What about the beach? Part 3.
My own mother thought I was a
Hello.
Which places Azula in a social context outside what we normally see. Not only do people not recognize who she is as the princess of the Fire Nation, but there are no enemies around her. At first, we see how Azula's mentality leads her to view even the most basic of social interactions as combative. During a game of beach volleyball, she immediately identifies a weakness of her opponent to exploit.
When she runs toward the ball, there's just the slightest hesitation of her left foot. I'm willing to bet a childhood injury has weakened her.
There's an interesting line that she says afterward.
Yes, we defeated you for all time. You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation.
Her need for perfection and social dominance means that friendly games are impossible, because to lose something, even something as trivial as this, is a moral failure of shame and humiliation. It's also in this episode that we see how her lack of empathy and combative mentality negatively impact her capacity for social connection with others. There is a clear desire to do so, but it requires skills that are fundamentally opposed to her psychological framework, which lacks the pro-social internal standards or abiding by culturally agreed social cues. The clearest example of this for Azula is being unable to connect with any of the guys in the party until Tyler teaches her to moderate her own behavior to fit in.
If you want a boy like you, just look at him and smile a lot and laugh at everything he says, even if it's not funny. How you like is in this party.
Though played as a joke, Azula has never had to moderate her behavior in this way before, to conform to a social standard of this kind. Beyond this, her Machiavellian traits and antisocial personality disorder mean that her usual approach towards emotional manipulation cannot get her what she wants in this scene, the genuine affection of a boy her age. Minna Lyons writes in The Dark Trial of Personality that the Machiavellian individuals were poor in their socio-emotional skills, without understanding what the outcomes of emotional manipulation might be in influencing the dynamics of a friendship. Between Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism, only narcissism related to high levels of self-reported socio-emotional intelligence. This research supports the idea that Azula does not have a narcissistic personality disorder. She has lacking socio-emotional skills as well, such as when she arrives at a sudden party. Simple colloquial phrases going over her head. But we should not be too quick to attribute this to a disorder. If something can be more easily explained in psychology, it should be. Being raised in the somewhat isolated, rigid social environment of the royal court, as deferred to her, could also explain these basic social deficiencies more easily. At the same time, this episode is also designed to demonstrate that Azula's Machiavellian persona is not all-encompassing. There are deeper emotional dimensions to her character. Psychology is never as blatant as that, and Azula is not. Though empathy does not come naturally to Azula, I want to narrow it down and gives us the capacity for it in regards to one specific character, Zuko.
Those summers we spent here seem so long ago. So much has changed. I thought I'd find you here. Come down to the beach. Come on. This place is depressing.
This moment is perplexing for Azula's character. When Zuko later talks about his stories, it's totally
Okay, they do. If you look at them, they go away.
But here, it's Azula. There does not seem to be much of a reason for Azula to purposefully search out her brother and bring him down to the beach here. She has purposely excluded him before. But there is a depth to her line here.
Come
She's
here.
simultaneously recognizing that Zuko is
Wow.
and
Baited.
other people. And she also reflects on their shared history in this place. That it's depressing. Perhaps because she too sees parts of the happiness they had in the past. And that she does understand.
Hello. Wait, why do I hear Jackie?
Because Viviana's at my house.
Oh. That makes sense.
Yeah, because we have our flute Christmas party today.
Lol.
Lol. So funny. Okay, that is.
Okay.
What are you typing? You literally. Wait, what did she say? I hope I said that in front of my uncle. Okay, Jenna's here too. Alright, so I'll just tell you guys. Okay, so we're talking about the plan for tomorrow, okay?
Yes.
I haven't brought it up to my parents again.
No, my aunt's cool. I just gotta know all the information.
I told them about it on Saturday when the Christmas party is here. Okay, good. You guys are here. Okay, so the plan.
The plan.
Tyler, you're gonna get dressed up at Jerry's house.
Yes.
And Jerry's gonna take you, June, and Linda.
Linda? Who's Linda?
Yeah, my bestie. June's friend.
Okay.
And then Cassie's gonna she's not gonna fall. They are not. Yeah, I can verify. But Cassie's gonna take Jenna and Maxie, and then we're gonna do this up there. Then we're gonna get there early. Like, I would say leave here by like 3 o'clock. Get there by 4 or 5.
In the morning?
At night, stupid. It's at night. It's at night.
Okay, I need all this typed out. I need all this typed out.
What do you guys want? So Cassie, we need to verify from you if you're gonna take Jenna and Maxie over here. Yes, we just woke up. I did not. You sound like you took a nap. No, shut up. Yeah. Okay. I really been awake since I said good morning. So, which is like, Jackie, shut the fuck up. Jackie, why are you telling me to shut up? Okay, Mom. Okay, Tyler. I'm trying to Viviana's house, right?
I really need all this typed out. You guys are not making sense right now.
Shut up and listen to Viviana. Lucille, shut up. We're gonna meet at the tamale place and eat tamales, and then we're gonna walk up and down the street to see the lights.
Who am I riding with?
Me, your mom.
Okay, and I meet at your house.
Yes, at my house.
Okay.
Tyler's meeting up at Jackie's house. Jackie's seeing June and Linda. Cassie, you're gonna pick up Jenna and Maxie, and you guys are gonna drive to the tamale place. I'll send you guys the address, okay? Okay, and then we're still doing the sleepover, right?
Not me. Not me.
Okay, but wait. So there's gonna be like parents there, right? That's what my mom wants to know. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I can't go because I'm a guy.
Okay, so the sleepover is questionable because Jackie, Linda, and then Tyler need a ride back. I could give them the ride, but then I might need a ride because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stay. Yeah, that defeats the purpose of the sleepover. Yeah. Okay. So my thing is, Cassie, if you want, you could have your mom stay and like walk with us around, and then like bonding time with my dad and my little sister. And then I'll give everyone who can't fit in your car a ride back. Today's 2021. Okay. Okay, so no sleepover, and okay, hold on, let me try.
Yeah, we should probably have this typed out.
It takes root when Azula is caught off guard as May first betrays her, followed by Ty Lee. When asking why, May says something that doesn't just confuse Azula, but it enrages her.
I love Zuko, and I fear you.
Azula has grown up around family relationships based on power and fear, and because of this, she too has based her relationships on it, which May even explicitly acknowledges. To someone who has only seen power and fear respected, and primarily related to others through those things, the prospect of May acting out of love or fear is unexpected and inexplicable. If someone she controlled for so long through fear can do this, then her whole idea of what makes her strong is being called into question. And being weak is the worst thing you can do. It doesn't fit within her psychology. This is one of the few moments where we see Azula lose her emotional composure.
No, you miscalculated. You should have feared me more.
This scene marks the beginning of delusions and persecution in Azula's mind. It's unsurprising that it begins with May and Ty Lee, the two characters we see she regularly trusts with her life and goals. If they can betray her, anyone can. The seeds of delusion had been planted, but it's important to understand how the delusions develop psychologically. In the episode Into the Inferno, Azula begins to suspect those around her of treachery for even the smallest of things. When the Dai Li are a few minutes late to the throne room, she interprets this as purposeful treachery. This is what is known as an interpretative delusion. It begins with a dominant idea such as persecution. There then ensues a reasoning and systematizing process that successfully crystallizes a series of interpretations out of the phenomenon. The dominant idea here is that people are conspiring against her, and a series of events are interpreted to fit that idea. She banishes the Dai Li, and soon after banishes all of the Imperial Firebending Guard and her servants under the same suspicion, even seeing a cherry pip as an intentional threat to her position. When Lo and Lee arrive to dissuade her from ascending to the throne, she interprets this as an attempt to undermine. This interpretative delusion reaches its height later in the episode when Azula attempts to do her hair by herself, but it tangles and she fails, uttering a peculiar line.
All right, Hair. It's time to face your doom.
Instead of accepting that relying on fear and raw power to accomplish things makes her weaker, she interprets this as her own body conspiring against her, treating her hair like she had all those in the palace. It is at this point that Azula's delusions evolve as she begins to hallucinate her mother.
What a shame. You always had such beautiful hair.
This line is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Azula's desire for perfectionism has always been represented by perfectly symmetrical hair, from her opening scene to when she fought Katara in Crossroads of Destiny. The fact that this is the moment where hallucinations begin could be because seeing this reflection of herself as imperfect is the thing that cuts most deeply. For Azula, to be imperfect is a moral failure. It's shameful and humiliating.
Don't pretend to act proud.
The hallucinatory version of her mother continues to criticize her, playing into her delusions of persecution, that she's too aggressive, too ambitious, her hair is already cut, things that she cannot change about herself. This is somewhat reflective of the relationship that we see they had in her childhood. Interestingly, nearly every interaction Ursa has with Azula is critical.
Azula, we don't speak that way. Young lady, not another word. What is wrong with that child? What is going on here? I don't know. It's time for a talk.
Facing down against this construction of her mother, Azula reasserts what she has always believed.
Fools. Fear is the only reliable way.
That that she wasn't meant to take the throne. Her mother is still the mastermind, but Azula now knows that she is to be Fire Lord in a way she didn't expect, through manipulating, through puppeting Zuko. Interestingly, this is a contradictory belief system now, something quite common in systematized delusions. Delusions may be signaling a failure of self-knowledge. A person may be of two minds about the content of the delusion. For example, someone who claims that nurses in the hospital want to poison him, but keeps eating the food they give him. Her mother is both simultaneously preventing her from taking her rightful place on the throne, and she is not meant to have the throne now. Though the persistence of her delusions and hallucinations over months and years, built on the lies and abuse of her father, may mean she meets the DSM duration criteria for a schizophrenic disorder, a closer examination of Azula's behavior and psychological processes may be better explained by a second diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder. This is defined as when a person prominently exhibits both schizophrenic signs and major symptoms such as manic depression and mania. In the search, Azula is shown to have suicidal tendencies, even throwing herself from Appa while in flight with little regard to her own safety. Uncontrollable thoughts and rapid speech are identified with schizoaffective disorder.
Same or next day doctor's appointments, in person or online.
Too, and while not certain, Azula is constantly tormented by her own tumultuous thoughts and voices. Negative symptoms like an inability to self-care are also not as severe for Azula. Despite her initial breakdown, she does show a remarkable return to form in Smoke and Shadow, once again maintaining perfectly symmetrical hair. The defining feature of schizoaffective disorder is experiencing periods of hallucination and delusions, with mood symptoms for intermittent periods. This part of her psychology echoes projection, because we can't ask precisely what Azula has felt across her years in the story. But in the comics, there is plenty of suggestion that she experiences bouts of radical anxiety, glee, and depressive moods. Collectively, these features would suggest a schizoaffective disorder rather than just schizophrenia. Path service. Before delving any deeper, it's important to recognize
What
that
the?
psychological disorders
Glowing sack? Where did I get this?
A diagnosis is not the end of the discussion. These mentalities and disorders develop under a host of environmental factors, and in particular, we should examine Azula's relationship with her parents to see where this mentality comes from. One of the interesting things that we see in Zuko's flashbacks is that though there are moments of tenderness with Zuko, virtually every interaction between Azula and her mother is a negative one. Azula even clearly overhears her own mother questioning what is wrong with her. Azula worships and gains the approval of her father, the more she feels that her mother is rejecting her. To a child, repeated moral disagreements are difficult to distinguish from complete rejection or even hatred over time, especially if Azula feels that this is the way she is. To Azula, the only way to be strong, which is the most important thing in the world to her now, is to be a monster in her mother's eyes. The end result is clear.
My own mother. I was a monster.
This relationship leads her to idolize Ozai from a young age, firmly believing that he would be the best Fire Lord, doing everything she can to appease him. She sees herself as the rightfully privileged child. She's the loyal one, the successful one. But the cruelty that underpins this twisted idolization culminates in a scene during the Phoenix King, when it comes time for her and her father to assault the Earth Kingdom.
You will remain here in the Fire Nation.
But I thought we were going to do this together. You can't treat me like this. You can't treat me like Zuko.
This moment of isolation and rejection by her father cuts deeper than anything else before. To be rejected like this is to be put on a level of her imperfect and weak brother, and there is nothing worse than that. It also speaks to a household affair of abuse, where siblings try their best to not be the one who bears the brunt of it. For Azula, this was always Zuko. This line suggests a fear of inheriting that position in an abusive household. But rather than finally seeing her father for the manipulative psychopath he is, using even his own children as tools to further his own goals, Azula believes him when he tells her that he can only trust this task to her.
I need you here to watch over the homeland. Without you being the child, I can only entrust to you.
For the first time in her story, a person successfully manipulates Azula. Ozai knowingly plays her desperate need for his approval against her, for his own personal gain. This, instead, would be his victory alone. He discards her when it becomes useful. This damaging lack of co-parenting leaves Azula out of her depth in other ways too. Many stated that there is much proof that injuries suffered by those who later become schizophrenic occur very early. Death of a mother, neglect or harshness, incessant quarreling between the parents. All three of these factors are shown to exist during Azula's primary psychological development. The 1993 Fincham and Osborne study reinforces this, finding that the destructive relationships between parents are even more predictive in childhood disorders than maternal depression or a negative child-parent relationship. Though not dead per se, Ursa does leave, which to a child can feel like abandonment on par with death. This next discussion is mostly conjecture regarding what we see of her story, but the Haju Gaib study explained that all of the children who developed schizophrenia or related disorders, such as schizoaffective disorder, each had a cold, rigorous, sadistic, or aggressive mother and a soft, indifferent, or passive father. They were only imitation parents. Their parents may be inadequate rather than malevolent. The roles of the sadistic and the passive parent are swapped. Ursa was never malevolent towards Azula. She actually expressed a deeper affection for her, though never to the extent that we see her connect with Zuko. Theoretically, this preference may hold some truth, and it could explain a lot psychologically. Sullivan writes that if one's indicated needs for tenderness are constantly rebuffed, one comes to manifest malevolent behavior when one needs tenderness in lieu of showing the need. Sullivan's description fits Azula to a T, lashing out when she feels vulnerable. It's likely that Ozai would have rebuffed any of her early attempts to find that tenderness, empathy, that nurturing love, and if Ursa felt unable to connect with her, becoming more passive in her parenting, either due to her depression or Ozai's controlling, abusive role in their relationship, this would have contributed to Azula's more violent tendencies.
Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the most iconic and widely celebrated series in recent memory, and for almost too many reasons to count. But if you were forced to choose one aspect as the deciding reason for its success, what would it be? A few answers that come to mind might be the intricate world building, creative and highly consistent magic system, well choreographed and animated fight sequences based on real-world martial arts, a lovable main cast portrayed by talented voice actors, the unique East Asian-inspired setting and philosophies of the series, the groundbreaking nature of the animated show, the overarching story, and the excellent balance of action, comedy, and drama the series manages over the course of its 3 seasons. And while all of these are good answers, and the truth probably lies in some combination of them, from my point of view, the element that truly elevated Avatar: The Last Airbender was the arc of its original primary antagonist turned anti-hero turned hero, Prince Zuko. Voiced by the highly talented Dante Bosco, Zuko is one of the most popular characters to have emerged in the modern media landscape over the last 2 decades. And while this may now sound like hyperbole to some listeners, I truly believe he is one of the best written character arcs I've ever come across in fiction. I understand that the concept of a villain who gradually has more depth to their character revealed is conflicted between their current state and a nobler one, and ultimately chooses the side of good is a path far from untrod in the realm of storytelling. But Zuko's arc contains certain unique elements that truly elevate it, as well as the show in which it features, to heights previously unseen in the realm of Western animation, and perhaps beyond. The opening 2 episodes of Avatar are, by my own estimation, some of the weakest in the series. The comedy is hit or miss, often much more childish and less clever than it is throughout the rest of the show's run. The art and animation simpler than what audiences will later be treated to, and the expository dialogue quite heavy-handed, dumping a lot of information on the viewer in ways you'd be hard-pressed to describe as subtle. But this isn't to say that these episodes are bad, and in their own ways they do set the rest of the series up for success quite well. We are effectively introduced to our 3 main heroes and the primary antagonist for the first season, being shown their personality traits through a succession of interactions. Aang is affable, lighthearted, and free-spirited, yet trying to escape some greater obligation from his past. Katara is weighed down by the burdens of caring for her tribe after the loss of her mother, and optimistic about the future. Sokka is cynical and sarcastic, but determined to fill the shoes of his warrior father and defend his people. The world is at war, and has been for 100 years, since the Fire Nation launched its devastating attack, and no one has seen an airbender for the entire preceding century. We also get shown how 3 of the 4 main bending forms work, and gain insight into the differences between them. How waterbenders can manipulate the physical state of their element, while firebenders can generate flames. We learn that At this point, audiences have no reason to expect that Zuko is anything but a standard villain. His temperamental, boisterous, menacing, and melodramatic nature, quite cliché by most standards, almost serves to cloak the meaning behind his main drive, that he must capture the Avatar to regain his honor. As we aren't given any further information on how he lost his honor, or even what this means, nor on how his scarring might be connected to this segment of his past, both of these elements of his character might easily be dismissed as mere decoration. After all, scars are prominent features of many villains. They rarely play a significant role in who those villains are as people, at least as far as audiences are made aware. In fact, even Zuko's status as a banished member of royalty is downplayed in favor of his aggression and menace. But from his first antagonistic interactions with our heroes, audiences are shown a degree of depth. When Zuko storms the nearly defenseless Water Tribe village, cowing its inhabitants with a fiery display and demanding that they hand over the Avatar, Aang offers to surrender, showcasing our hero's initiative and willingness to put others' well-being before his own, while Zuko creating a sense of honor. In the resulting fight aboard the banished prince's ship, Aang manages to escape through an awesome display of power, and a seething Zuko is left stunned and furious. And thus the main dynamic of Season 1 is established. Aang, Sokka, and Katara will be attempting to make it to the Northern Water Tribe so that the young Avatar can learn waterbending, while Zuko will pursue them. But the third episode immediately subverts this setup with a surprising twist. It presents a new antagonistic force in the character of recently promoted Commander Zhao, an ambitious, ruthless, and even more temperamental Fire Nation officer. Where Zuko might have sufficed as a sole, one-dimensional villain in an ordinary series, here the audience is enticed to sympathize with him just after establishing his status as a villain.
You're just a banished prince. No home, no allies. Your own father doesn't even want you.
By being shown his relative powerlessness in the face of more recognized commanders in his own nation's military, thereby making him an underdog that viewers can root for against an even worse foe, as well as further developing that his drive to capture the Avatar is rooted not in true malice, but a desire to simply return home. Audience members find themselves cheering Zuko on in an Agni Kai against Zhao. As elsewhere in the episode, Aang makes the discovery that he truly is the last surviving member of his people.
Prince Zuko, have you forgotten what happened last time you dueled the master?
I will never forget.
The ending of this episode, where Zuko spares Zhao after defeating him in a ritualized duel, thereby claiming the moral high ground while also humiliating the prideful commander, not only furthers our understanding of Zuko as someone reluctant to resort to brutality in a culture defined by it, but cements his rivalry with Zhao, a dynamic that will span the entirety of the first season and contribute greatly to the Banished Prince's development. Over the course of the next few episodes, Zuko pursues the trio of heroes on their journey north, and I think it's no surprise that the show's weakest episodes, The King of Omashu and The Great Divide, are two of the only ones to not feature the Banished Prince and his lovable uncle.
Are we
The dynamic
screaming
between these two
outside?
lends
What?
itself to plenty of
I
great
heard you
comedy.
screaming
Why
upstairs.
don't you enjoy
That was like 2 hours ago.
jasmine tea?
I don't need any coffee tea.
The lotus style was in my sleep the whole night.
But it also helps us to learn more about who Zuko is as a person. Not a power-hungry tyrant or sadistic warmonger, but a deeply troubled adolescent trying to make sense of what his place in the world is, with his wise uncle gently nudging him in a better direction. When Iroh is captured by Earth Kingdom soldiers in Part 1 of the Winter Solstice double episode, Zuko unexpected age with war looming on the horizon. Prince Zuko instead sought out responsibility, attending a war council headed by his father, the Fire Lord. But when the young prince witnessed his country's military leadership planning to callously sacrifice a unit of soldiers in order to achieve a greater objective, his moral code compelled him to speak out against this strategy, violating the Fire Nation's stern customs of honor that govern nearly every aspect of social interaction. Having assumed that the recipient of his insult was the aged general he interrupted, Zuko arrogantly agreed to an Agni guide, only to find that, as the insult had occurred in the presence of the Fire Lord, it was the Fire Lord himself who had been dishonored by Zuko's actions, and therefore the young prince would have to duel his own father. After refusing to fight, an action viewed by his cruel, tyrannical father as a sign of weakness, Zuko was mutilated in front of the entire royal court. A permanent reminder of his failing literally burned onto his face, before being banished. And after all of this suffering and humiliation, he was left with only one hope for redemption: capturing the Avatar, who had not been seen for a full century. Condemned to wander the world for what was likely intended by his own father to be a never-ending snipe hunt. The stories of Aang and Zuko share many parallels. Where the former hoped to flee from responsibility while the latter sought it out. Both were children whose entire worlds were taken from them by war. Both battled feelings of inferiority and were made to feel like outsiders among their own. And both remain burdened with shame. Aang feels guilt over not being able to aid his people in their time of greatest need, while Zuko suffers the indignity of life as an outcast with royal heritage, unwanted by his own family. Both attempt to fulfill what they believe to be their destinies. Aang's to master the four elements and restore balance to the world as the Avatar, and Zuko's to restore his honor.
No!
Redeem himself in the eyes of his father and nation. And both, having been cut off from their homes and families, are forced to form new bonds which will inevitably save them. At the end of this episode, as Aang finds comfort in the idea that he has a chance to help the world here and now, Zuko's crewmates come to a new understanding of the exiled prince, who repays this by relenting when the Avatar's sky bison is spotted, deciding to prioritize the crew's safety over a chance at regaining all that he has lost. Though it may not seem like much at the time, through this little gesture we see that Zuko, like Aang, is capable of growth. And in the very next episode, The Blue Spirit, this connection between Aang and Zuko is developed even further when the newly promoted Admiral Zhao, utilizing an expanded set of resources, captures the young Avatar in the middle of an errand to aid his ailing friends. Imprisoned within an imposing fortress garrisoned by millions of soldiers, scheduled for transport to the Fire Nation itself, and with his plight unknown to his friends, it appears that Aang has no chance of escape. That is, until a mysterious masked swordsman infiltrates the prison and cuts his bonds. Though his identity is not revealed until the end of the episode, this silent rescuer turns out to be none other than Prince Zuko. Having been faced with the prospect of Zhao receiving credit for capturing Aang, and thereby losing his only chance at regaining his honor, Zuko decides that it is in his best interest to free the captive Avatar. As the two sneak and then flee with Aang using the use of swords to avoid revealing his identity, we are shown that the two complement each other quite well, foreshadowing their eventual reluctant alliance turned genuine friendship. But despite hating the Avatar, even appears to be quickly forgotten, it will resurface in various ways and be explored in further depth over the course of the series. And it is a subject worth exploring, one which I will venture into in more detail further on in this video: how the place and station of one's birth can come to define their life, for good or ill. By having Aang ask this of Zuko, the writers coax the audience into asking it as well, not only about the banished prince, but those around us, and perhaps even ourselves. Over the remainder of the first season, Zuko's pursuit of the Avatar continues, but as an antagonist he is mostly shunted to the side to make way for Admiral Zhao, who continues to serve as a foe for both our heroes and Zuko himself. When Zhao discovers, or at least is given strong reason to suspect, that Zuko was the masked stranger who freed the Avatar from his clutches, the Admiral attempts to remove the prince as a threat entirely, hiring pirates to bomb his ship. Despite being severely injured in the blast, Zuko manages to survive this assassination attempt and sneaks aboard one of Zhao's vessels, aided by his uncle. Here, away from the pressures of leading a crew of their own, Iroh begins to nudge Zuko in the direction of good more firmly, challenging the troubled prince to truly ask himself what he wants, rather than simply accepting the roles he has been assigned by those with power over him. As audiences later learn in more detail, Iroh himself stands opposed to the Fire Nation's goals of domination, having become disillusioned with his country's path after the death of his own son in battle, and the subsequent failure of his siege of the Earth Kingdom capital of Ba Sing Se. But having been passed over in the country's succession by the schemes of his murderous younger brother, and largely viewed as inadequate after his military failure, Iroh has little ability to effect change from within the system, except when it comes to Zuko. Having all but adopted his nephew as a surrogate son after the loss of his own, Iroh uses their time together during the prince's banishment to develop Zuko's moral character. By planting these little seeds in his nephew's mind, and nurturing them in a manner that avoids arousing the suspicion of Zuko or others, he helps to subtly steer the banished prince towards the path of good. In the two-part finale of Season 1, as Zhao's massive fleet lays siege to the capital of the Northern Water Tribe, a helpless, spirit world-bound Aang is finally captured by his dark mirror, who finds himself unable to properly escape with his prize. Here, as the two shelter in a cave to wait out a blizzard, Zuko reflects on his past and present, and the contrast between himself and his quarry. Mistakenly assuming that Aang has had an easy life, a rather short-sighted assumption given the role he himself has played in pursuing the young Avatar across the world, Zuko remarks that nothing has ever come easy to him, where Aang is like his prodigious sister, born lucky while her brother was lucky to be born. But the troubled prince is capable of recognizing one vital truth: that the hardships he has endured have shaped him into the man he is today.
I've always had to struggle and fight, and that's made me strong.
If you're managing a large team of complex projects, I'd recommend trying Asana. It's free to sign up and easy to use.
In the climactic confrontation at the North Pole, Iroh is forced to reveal his true colors in the face of Zhao's plan to kill the prince, while the Avatar's companions track down and easily defeat the snowbound prince. Not willing to let a helpless Zuko die, Aang chooses instead to save his foe from the raging blizzard. And in turn, as the Fire Nation forces flee from the might of the ocean spirit, and a vengeful Zhao seeks out Zuko, the banished prince likewise takes when their fight is interrupted by forces far beyond them. As he watches a terrified Zhao being dragged into the depths by the spirits the man sought to conquer, Zuko's gut instinct is to reach out a hand to the Admiral, who, true to his character, refuses it, dying as he lived, belligerent, arrogant, and alone. In the aftermath of the battle, as Zuko and his uncle flee the devastation, each faces an uncertain future. Iroh is forced to worry if word of his treachery might have survived the siege, while Zuko has lost his best chance at capturing the Avatar. His sagely uncle, however, urges him to simply sleep and forget the demands laid upon him, telling his nephew,
Maybe you should rest. A man needs his rest.
but unbeknownst to them, the Fire Lord has learned of both his brother's treason and his son's failure. dispatches his own daughter, Zuko's sister Azula, to both bring her brother home and then complete his task for him. With Admiral Zhao dead, and Zuko having lost the good graces of his own nation as he begins to transition a new antagonist was needed to oppose our heroes, and audiences receive a proper introduction to her in the first episode of Season 2. While Zuko himself served as a dark mirror to our hero Aang throughout Season 1, the banished prince receives a dark mirror of his own in his younger sister, the ruthless, ambitious, preternaturally gifted, and downright sociopathic Azula. Interestingly enough, the writers had already worked to establish her character from the middle of Season 1, albeit in a very subtle manner. When Iroh tells the crew of their ship the story behind his nephew's banishment, as the Fire Lord goes to strike his son from the powerful Agni Kai, the camera cuts to the assembly of officers and court officials watching. Iroh recoils in horror, while Admiral Zhao grins, and observant audience members will also notice a then unintroduced Azula watching with barely contained glee. But while this glimpse and Zuko's monologue in the cave lay limited groundwork, our proper introduction to Azula comes in the form of her fantastic first scene. In contrast to her brother, whose first moments showed us a spoiled, temperamental prince desperate to accomplish his goal, our first proper look at Azula reveals a perfectionist who not only seeks but expects absolute mastery over herself and others, only losing her composure for the briefest moment when her bending technique is declared by instructors to be just a hair out of place. After Azula informs the members of the Royal Guard accompanying her of their mission, and reminds them that she will not hesitate to cut them down should they dither in carrying out her orders, the captain of the ship arrives with news that the tides will not allow them to dock. Twisting his wording, the Fire Nation princess casually notes that were she to have the captain thrown overboard, the tides would not think twice about dashing him against the rocks, with their conversation culminating in the line,
Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over.
This glimpse into her personality is made all the more convincing by voice actress Grey Delisle, whose performance was so strong that the writers decided to add this scene, originally planned simply to cast the role, into the finalized episode. Azula proves to be everything her older brother isn't. Naturally gifted, ruthless and remorseless, graceful and dignified, and above all else self-assured. Where Zuko struggles with the respect of others, Azula has never known anything else. And where the young prince finds himself torn between differing paths, his sister has never been forced to grapple with any such questions about her identity or nature. But the greatest irony is that while Zuko desperately wishes to be like Azula, it is his shortcomings that ultimately save him from suffering her eventual fate. When Azula tries to entice Zuko and his uncle to return home, she appeals to her brother's deepest desire, telling him that their father, concerned after a plot against his life, now values family above all else. Iroh is rightfully skeptical, but Zuko, distraught after once again losing the Avatar at the North Pole, and broken after his years of exile, is eager to believe his sister's promises. These promises, of course, turn out to be lies, and when Zuko and Iroh escape the trap set for them, they are declared fugitives from the Fire Nation, left with no choice but to go on the run in a hostile country, a country they have spent their entire lives at war with. Over the course of the next few episodes, as Azula supplants her brother in the role of the main antagonist for our primary heroes, we follow Zuko and Iroh not as villains, but refugees simply trying to survive in a war-torn world. And while Iroh himself has already had a change of heart, this experience proves crucial in developing Zuko's moral character, freeing him from the corrupting environment into which he was born, and allowing a better version of himself to gradually shine through. The first illuminating experience comes when the two are briefly taken in by a local Earth Kingdom family, the first of many chances Zuko gets to see the effects of his nation's war from the other side. The family's daughter, Som, works as a healer, tending to the many soldiers and civilians affected by the fighting, revealing that her own father was taken by the Fire Nation when she was a child, likely to be pressed into slave labor or killed, and that she and her mother were left with no choice but to flee before starting a new life. Sensing Zuko's past trauma, later that night Song attempts to get him to open up, revealing her own scars in what becomes a recurring motif. While Zuko himself is unable to acknowledge the damage done to him by his own family and nation on account of his birth and his ingrained sense of shame, others are quick to recognize the injustice he has suffered, even if they remain unaware of the details.
It's okay. They've hurt me too.
And as Zuko is forced to wander and beg, watching his uncle perform for amusement just to sustain themselves, his already wounded pride suffering further indignity, he resorts to stealing what he feels is owed to him as a crown prince, even if this title is no longer recognized by anyone but himself. When this drives a wedge between the fugitive prince and his uncle, Zuko then sets out on his own, leaving behind the man who has long served as his moral guiding light in a terribly dark world. And here, we come to what might very well be the greatest episode in the series, and almost certainly my personal favorite, Zuko Alone. In contrast to every other episode of Avatar, the writers decide to forego giving viewers even a glimpse at the main heroes of our story, instead choosing to solely follow Zuko through a day in his new life as a lone wanderer. Structured like a classic Western film, we watch the exiled prince travel through a war-torn landscape before arriving in a small, dilapidated town, and nearly every single scene, every single shot, is packed with detail about not only this devastating world, but the characters who inhabit it. Right from the opening, a starving Zuko makes his way on the ostrich horse he stole from the family who provided him hospitality, a stark reminder. Struggling forward under the scorching sun, his stomach rumbling, he spots a couple camped beside a tree, tending to a chunk of succulent meat roasting over an open fire, and his first instinct is to reach for his sword. But then he notices that the woman is pregnant, and after a moment's hesitation, he relents and presses on. Villainous as many of his prior actions have been, there are still some lines that Zuko will not cross. While the title of this episode is rather straightforward, I think it encapsulates an important truth about who Zuko is as a person, one that is confirmed by the series' end. That when on his own, away from the influences of both his moral soul, Zuko's true self finally has a chance to breathe, a sentiment echoed in Iroh's later line about losing his way only to find it on his own. Arriving at a rundown Earth-Kingdom town, Zuko finds the populace living in fear of the brutal war captured in his entry. He intends to simply resupply before continuing on, but when a group of children throw eggs at the soldiers, Zuko reflexively covers for them, a small altruistic gesture that tells us more about who he is deep down. And this kindness is rewarded when one of the boys, Lee, invites him to living in a world that has endured a century of warfare. Lee's family situation is tragically commonplace. His parents struggle to not only provide for themselves, but support the ongoing war effort, while Lee's older brother has gone off to fight in the Earth Kingdom military. As he performs menial labor in exchange for food and a roof over his head, Zuko can't help but see glimpses of himself in the clumsy yet determined Lee. Initially hoping to move on as quickly as possible, the banished prince finds himself instructing the boy in how to use a sword, all the while refusing to answer Lee's inquiries into his own past. And in a way, it almost seems that Zuko himself doesn't really know who he is anymore. Interspersed with this main narrative, we get flashbacks to one of the most important chapters of Zuko's life. And this is where another of the techniques employed across the series shines so brightly: the use of non-linear storytelling to provide context for how and why Zuko became the man he is today, by showing us who he was before. We see that as a child, Zuko was rather ordinary, capable of cruelty, as shown with his treatment of the turtle ducks, but more importantly capable of remorse and growth. Despite being raised in the ruling class of a militaristic regime with domination, to see his side as justified, spreading prosperity and civilizing the world through their might, he was in many respects a normal child. Zuko's cruel father remained distant and dismissive, encouraging the villainous traits of his sister, while his kind-hearted mother guided the young prince down a better path. In a culture defined by rigid honor and prioritizing an attitude of might makes right, Zuko found himself longing to be more like his ruthless and talented sister, developing an inferiority complex that he comes to spend in battle. Was what so many boys desire, to prove himself worthy in the eyes of his father, someone every child should be able to count on, holding up the man as a symbol of all he should strive to please and emulate. And his mother, the primary positive influence in his life, the main significant force restraining Zuko from turning down his sister and so many of his countrymen abruptly vanished, becoming entangled in intrigue. The flashbacks in this episode do an excellent job at showing rather than telling, giving us a childlike view of the assassination in a quick succession, making it quite clear what has happened to Iroh, Lu-Ten, and Azulon without ever directly spelling it out to the audience. Perhaps the most impactful scene is one in which a young Zuko awakens to find his sister in the doorway, childishly chanting that their father is going to kill him. After she leaves, Zuko sits alone in the dark, desperately trying to convince himself that his sister was lying. Just a confused, frightened child denied the upbringing that would have allowed him to flourish. In many ways, he still is that same frightened, confused child, as evidenced by the end of this flashback, where Zuko once more finds himself lying alone, still repeating the same empty phrase years later. Azula always lies. People Zuko gets to experience the destruction his nation has wrought on the rest of the world firsthand. But while he has already passed through battlefields and encountered refugees, in Zuko alone, this experience becomes far more personal through his connection to Lee's family. Like so many other things about this world, they are left holding on by a thread, just waiting for the blow that will shatter their tenuous existence, which comes in the news borne by the cruel militia soldiers, who tauntingly inform the family that their son's unit was captured and will likely be slaughtered. Lee's father decides to enlist in a last-ditch effort to save his eldest son, leaving him distraught about their future. At this, Lee himself presses Zuko to stay, telling Lee that he reminds him of his older brother. While it appears that a part of Zuko wants nothing more than to be able to find solace in a new family and a new life, he is not prepared to let go of the identity that has been molded around him. Giving the boy a knife he received from his uncle years prior as a parting gift, Zuko shows him the inscription, "Never give up without a fight," in a sense the guiding words of Zuko's own life, and the best and most honest advice the exiled prince himself is capable of giving. However, just as he is about to depart the following morning, Zuko learns that Lee pulled the knife on the soldiers when they returned, and that the militia have been stricken as punishment. Like so many other instances in his life, Zuko's attempts at helping have only made things worse. His small good deed has only caused more suffering. And I think it provides insight into how Zuko was raised, that his idea of helping was to give a knife to a child. For ultimately, what is a knife meant for if not killing? This tiny interaction is emblematic of how in this broken world, he, like so many others, unconsciously perpetuates the cycle of violence without a second thought. For while a weapon in the proper hands can be a force for good in opposing evil and defending the innocent, in the wrong hands it can just as easily make things worse. But here, unlike so many other instances throughout his past, Zuko has a chance to set things right. As Lee's desperate mother begs the exiled prince for help, after a moment of contemplation, Zuko decides to do the right thing.
I'll get your son back.
What follows is a Western-style showdown in the town square, where for the first time, we the audience get to root for Zuko not simply as the lesser of two evils, but as a genuine hero. And though we don't yet know it, this is merely a taste of things to come. Our troubled anti-hero defeats the first three soldiers with ease, but when the fourth, an earthbender, proves too strong, Zuko is forced to reveal his true nature as a firebender. Overpowering the cruel militia captain, he stands triumphant as flames inherently tied to his old identity, and because of this, as he draws upon that strength, Zuko proudly declares himself to be the crown prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne, a status that by this point, only he himself recognizes. For despite all he has gone through, all he has experienced, Zuko's past still has far too great a hold over his present, and he clings to it rather than face the unknown future. This episode has numerous phenomenal moments, but one of the greatest, and most tragic, is the scene that follows this misguided declaration. After learning of his true identity, the townspeople he saved instantly react not with celebration or respect, but fear and revilement. Even Lee's mother, who minutes before was tearfully begging for his help, pushed the fugitive prince away, while Lee, who idolized the Zuko he thought he knew, the part of Zuko that could be, now refuses to even make eye contact. This episode is a great subversion of the Western formula, by which a lone stranger with a troubled past rides into a remote town, faces down a corrupt authority, and saves its ordinary inhabitants. But it speaks volumes to the broken state of the world that when his identity is revealed, the people Zuko saved turn on him in an instant, retreating to the false security provided by the corrupt soldiers, just as Zuko himself returns to the familiarity of the Fire Nation. Because sometimes, as is all too common in the face of abuse and trauma, it's easier to cling to the devil we know rather than embrace uncertainty. To convince ourselves that the cages erected around us, the chains that bind us, are there for our safety. Sometimes, it's easier to just pretend. As Zuko rides off into the sunset, it is not as a hero, but as an outcast. A man with no home, no family, and no goal in mind. But in spite of all this, we the audience may feel some satisfaction that he's done the right thing. And hopefully, Zuko himself does too. For while he may have little else to his name, the exiled prince has proven that despite what he, his family, or the rest of the world may believe, he does still possess honor.
A fitness miracle is about. When your workouts have joy, it's a joy to work out. The original Peloton bike is our best price ever, $39 a month. All access membership separate. Terms apply. See website for details.
In many ways, Zuko alone could be considered a filler episode. After all, it has no direct bearing on the series' overarching plot, and doesn't even feature a single scene with the main heroes. But it does give us crucial insight into not only Zuko's past, but how the experiences of his youth have shaped his present. And in doing so, the show dares to touch on a subject rarely explored well or thoroughly, even in adult-centered media. A subject many one which most people would rather not address at all. How much of what makes you, you, is determined by circumstances beyond your control? To put the question more bluntly, if you were born in Germany in the early 1920s, would you have become a Nazi? If you were born into a white family in the Deep South in the 1940s, would you have supported the Klan and fought for segregation? If you were born in the Soviet Union shortly after the revolution, would you have blindly cheered on Stalin's purges and denounced your own neighbors and even family to the secret police? Most people like to think that we would have been different, that we would have joined the resistance, we would have marched for equality, we would have spoken out against the injustices that look so obvious to us from the comforts of distance and hindsight. But the frightening and sobering truth is that, if we were born into a society where the vast majority of people thought a certain way, raised from birth to hold certain beliefs, most of us would not have done anything. In fact, most of us would have gone along blindly with what everyone else was doing, because that is how human beings work. We fall into line, we adapt to our surroundings, we justify our actions and the actions of those around us post hoc, and both consciously and unconsciously mold ourselves to our social environments. Some of our species' greatest advantages and most terrible flaws. In the book Ordinary Men, historian Christopher Browning provides a disturbingly insightful look into human nature by examining the case of Reserve Police Battalion 101, a German auxiliary unit during the Second World War, whose members went on to participate in the Holocaust. While it might seem easy to simply explain away the reservists' actions as those of monstrous, bloodthirsty, the truth is more complex. The nearly 500 men of Reserve Police Battalion still continued to commit them. By the time their deployment ended, Reserve Police Battalion 101 had been responsible for the murder of over 38,000 Eastern European Jews, as well as the deportation of another 45,000 to concentration camps where the victims would face almost certain death. At the end of his chilling investigation, Browning writes, "What, then, is one to conclude? Most of all, one comes away from the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 with great unease. This story of ordinary men is not the story of all men. The Reserve policemen faced choices, and most of them committed terrible deeds. But those who killed cannot be absolved by the notion that anyone in the same situation would have done as they did. For even among them, some stopped taking responsibility as a personal matter. At the same time, however, the collective behavior of the unit has deeply disturbing implications. If the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 could become killers under such circumstances, what group of men cannot? While it is certainly important to condemn the evil actions of others, it is equally important to understand how the perpetrators came to do evil in the first place, and to explore the circumstances that lead many ordinary human beings down darker paths than our own, not only to help prevent such atrocities from occurring in the future, but out of an awareness for the fact that were it not for the blind luck of when and where we were born, our fates could very well have been their own. After all, as much as it might comfort us to think otherwise, even the most heinous criminals and perpetrators of the most horrific acts share in common with us their status as human beings. It is not monsters that we must remain wary of, but ourselves. Or, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn so brilliantly wrote in the Gulag Archipelago, the line separating good and evil runs not through states, nor social classes, nor political parties, but through the heart of every human being, and through all human beings. This line shifts. It sidens and even becomes overwhelming. One small bridgehead of child should be able to rely on for support and guidance, instead neglected, abused, and then discarded him. It's not surprising that the exiled prince remains troubled, even as Iroh tries to ease him into shedding his old sense of self. Zuko remains angry and frustrated, veering between snapping at Iroh and begrudgingly accepting his uncle's plans and advice. But deep down, he is haunted by a newfound purposelessness. Even as he comes to realize the damage his upbringing did to him, and see the devastation his own evil have wrought on the rest of the world, even as he is forced to see firsthand that he is far from the only person with scars, Zuko doesn't know how to be anyone else. And even as he and his uncle settle into the Earth Kingdom capital, with the latter enthusiastically rising through the ranks of the local tea industry, Zuko cannot bring himself to feel like he belongs. It's one of the reasons his segment from the episode The Tales of Ba Sing Se is so meaningful. In it, Zuko is confronted with a very mundane situation, going on a date with a local girl. Or, at least, it should be mundane. But to Zuko, raised in an abusive, controlling environment before being cast off his own land, simply connecting with another human being on a personal level is an alien experience. But his scars need not define him. Zuko finds it within himself to reciprocate his date's kindness, lighting a few small fires in an otherwise darkened cityscape. And at the end of the episode, he is forced to admit that his uncle, in however small a way, was right. It was nice. When learning that the Avatar has arrived in the city to look for his sky bison, Zuko's immediate thought is to resume the pursuit that dominated so much of his life, even as he seems to know on some deeper level it will no longer provide him a ticket home. Ignoring his uncle's pleas to move on, he infiltrates the Dailies headquarters and discovers a captive Appa, only to be confronted by Iroh. Here, after many months of gentle encouragement, his uncle finally resorts to brutal bluntness, asking his nephew what he plans to do now, and scolding him for never thinking things through. But his harsh words contain a glimmer of hope. It is time for Zuko to decide what he wants to do, to cast off the demands that have plagued and chained him since birth and become the man he wants to be.
It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
And an anguished Zuko, forced to confront reality, makes yet another step towards redemption. He frees Appa, discards the spirit mask, the last vestige of his mental existence as an exile in the civil war for the restoration of order, and heads for home. Not his old home, but the new one he and his uncle have made for themselves. And for a time, embracing the simple, honest life of an ordinary man, Zuko is happy. But as many people know from painful experience, the past can rarely be escaped that easily. When his sister arrives in the city to lead the coup d'etat against the last great bastion of resistance to the Fire Nation's power, Zuko is ambushed, arrested, and imprisoned within the palace alongside Katara, one of the Avatar's closest companions. As should be expected, Katara explodes with anger at Zuko, rightly blaming him for the many horrible actions he committed in his pursuit of Aang and his friends. But while justified, Katara's viewpoint is not complete. Nowhere is this more evident when, after tearfully being told by Katara that the Fire Nation took her mother from her, Zuko finally finds the strength to respond, replying,
I'm sorry. That's something we have in common.
This is the first time in the series that Katara truly sees Zuko not merely as some malevolent force or embodiment of the Fire Nation's aggression, but as a fellow human being, a person bearing scars much like her own. And to mirror her realization, this is the first time that Zuko finally acknowledges the wrongs this tender moment, remembering the water she was gifted from the spirit oasis at the Numero, Katara offers to attempt to heal Zuko's physical scars, just as their recognition of each other's mutual humanity and suffering has worked to mend their mental ones. They are, of course, interrupted by the arrival of Aang and Iroh, and so we never get to see if the healing water would have restored Zuko's face, because on a deeper level that's not how life works. We don't get to remove our scars. We can learn from them, and we can build upon the damage done. And it is at this point that Zuko, after all he has learned and developed, is subjected to his greatest trial yet. When his uncle arrives alongside the Avatar, Zuko's eyes are immediately drawn to his former quarry. But Iroh, long the guiding moral light of the vanished prince's path, restrains his nephew as Aang and Katara flee. Iroh tells Zuko that he has come to the deciding point in his life, the crossroads of his destiny. Before him stretch two very different paths, and deep down, the prince should know which is right. But their heart-to-heart is interrupted by Azula, pursuing the fleeing Avatar with the help of the Dai Li. Having toppled the central government of the Earth Kingdom, only one true threat to the Fire Nation's dominance still remains, one she is determined to stop. And so, in contrast to the peace and simplicity his uncle promises, Azula makes her brother a grander offer. Help me defeat the Avatar, and I will see your honor restored. It is the ultimate devil's bargain. Everything Zuko has spent years of his life seeking, everything he thought was lost to him forever, it can all be his if he but commits this one evil act. His honor, his status, glory and public admiration, his family and home, even his father's love. When Azula leaves him to pursue the Avatar, the camera focus on a conflicted Zuko contemplating her offer. And a short time later, as Aang and Katara battle desperately in the Crystal Catacombs, with victory hanging in the Zuko comes to be saved by his admission of weakness and the necessity for personal growth, which stands in stark contrast to the fate of his own dark mirror, his sister, Azula. Where Zuko confronts and tames the darkness within his soul, Azula both nourishes and is nourished by it. Where her brother heeds his guilt in finding a better path, she suppresses hers as a sign of weakness. Where he finds the courage to reach out and rely upon others, she shuts herself off from them, seeing others as little more than accessories to her own power. Valuing intimidation through strength over genuine personal connection, as her brother gains and deepens his friendships, Azula ultimately finds that those around her choose their love of others over their fear of her. And having fully embraced the ruthless persona her father and society encouraged, the persona Zuko himself previously wanted nothing more than to successfully adopt, Azula cannot fathom how to handle these betrayals, spiraling into paranoia and bitterness as her brother finds belonging, purpose, and inner peace. Where Zuko embraces the love others have shown him, even when, as in the case of his uncle, it is cloaked in justified disappointment at his mistakes, Azula recoils from it, growing furious at merely imagining her mother's assurances that despite Azula's flaws, she still loves her daughter. As the return of Sozin's Comet approaches, heralding the climactic showdown that the entire series has been building towards, Zuko is finally reunited with the uncle who proved so pivotal in his redemption. An anxious Zuko struggles
That's
to
why you don't
face
play
his
with it,
sorrow and
man.
shame at having
What was
betrayed
going
his
on?
uncle,
Pain, I
only to
was
find
looking
himself
at you.
being warmly embraced. And when Zuko asks how he can be forgiven so easily, and says that he thought his uncle would be furious, Iroh replies,
I was never angry with you. I was sad because I was afraid you lost your way. I did lose my way.
Fix it.
I found it. You did it yourself.
and though Zuko certainly did have help finding the right path, ultimately, it was he who made the choice to walk it. In the end, he proved to be the architect of his own redemption and the master of his own destiny. In the four-part finale, as Aang battles the Fire Lord turned Phoenix King and Sokka and Suki take on the Inner Fleet, Zuko and Katara travel to the Fire Nation capital to prevent Azula's ascension to the throne.
You gotta
While the other
bring it
members
all
of
the
his
way.
army certainly
Thought I
contain
did.
plenty of
No, that's not all the way.
character
If it dips like that, that means you didn't bring it all the way.
Others, the highlight of the series is found not in the Avatar's battle against
Oh.
Ozai, but here, in the dramatic confrontation between Zuko and his sister, the last Agni Kai. Zuko faces down his own dark mirror, a sobering reminder of what could very well have been his own fate. And while we, the audience, naturally cheer for the young and loving, sociopathic sister, with its intense flares of blue and red fire flashing together, underscored by the slow, dramatic theme, the entire affair is tragic and triumphant in nature. These two combatants are lifelong enemies, but it must be remembered that they are also siblings, two people who should have been compatible, who should have been able to rely on one another, who should never have been brought to this. Whether we can for while the pair shared a starting point, their two paths have long since diverged. In a final display of this, when a desperate Azula treacherously fires a bolt of lightning at Katara in violation of the rules of Agni Kai, Zuko selflessly leaps in front of his friend, left to writhe in pain on the ground as electricity racks his body.
Hey.
The prince who began his journey as a selfish and belligerent adolescent desperate for approval and glory is now willing to give up his claim to the throne, and indeed lay down his life for another. But while he ends up being healed by a friend, his sister is left to wallow in impotent rage, straining futilely against both her physical and mental bonds, alone, powerless, and broken. And in the aftermath of the last Agni Kai, when Zuko finally ascends to the throne, he does so not to follow in the footsteps of his warmongering, villainous forefathers, as his sister sought to, but to forge a new path of peace and reconciliation, a path others helped to reveal, but he chose to tread. Out of what I consider to be the 6 best episodes of the series, I think it is no coincidence that Zuko proves instrumental to the plot in 4 of them, one of which
You're not doing it right.
and receives meaningful development in one of the other 2. us that despite our failings or flaws, despite the hardships we endure, despite the scars that appear to define us, even despite the pain we in our confused and wounded states inflict on others, there remains a way back to the light, so long as we have the strength, honesty, and courage to seek it. And therein lies the brilliance of Zuko's story.
What is the best credit card? You know credit card shows
you eating?
Not really much
Ice.
happened with him except for his powers being stolen and community becoming. But the next big moment in his history was when Rand Meacham became a subsidiary of Oracle Inc., a charitable organization created by Namor the Submariner. As a part of this, Danny went ahead and reformed the Heroes for Hire until Namor sold the entire company to Stark Ochikawa a little over a year later. Now, many have pointed out that Iron Fist never took part in the superhuman civil war, where the superhero community fought over having registered their secret identities. Well, believe it or not, he was in fact there, but was actually posing as Daredevil while Matt Murdock was out of the country. As Daredevil, Danny worked with Captain America in the Secret Avengers as an anti-registrant. After the war, Danny continued to not register, but he still had a publicly known identity. This is because before the Civil War, Danny was registered in the United States as a living, lethal weapon. In fact, TMZ wrote this in Iron Man's face, who accused Danny of unsanctioned vigilante work. To further add insult to injury, Danny was secretly using his fortune to fund Luke Cage and his group of unregistered Avengers into this amazing suit. Danny eventually met his predecessor and the trainer of his father, Orson Randall, who gave Danny the look of the Iron Fist. In addition to hosting the history of every Iron
Quiet down,
Fist,
man.
it also contained a book of martial arts and techniques, which Danny studied and perfected seemingly almost instantly. With Orson uncovering more weapons, Danny managed to stop the terrorist organization Hydra, who was not only taking over his company, but was also trying to take over Cut Line. Afterwards, Danny decided to turn his company into a large non-profit charity. A big part of this is the Thunder Dojo. It gives low-income kids a place to come after school, where they're taught kung fu, tutored in school,
was announced as a beta, but first, I want to direct your attention to this gentleman, Peter Molyneux. He introduced the world to Milo for Xbox Connect, if you're old enough to remember, and is now working on a new blockchain. Not a feature or a marketplace, but an entire game dedicated to this stuff, and this is a huge deal. So guys, yeah, this is an inevitable next step for the gaming industry, and with the craze behind the metaverse and a one-world currency, this crypto stuff is just getting started.
Hello? Okay. You wanna go now?
Yeah, GameStop.
Okay. No mall, but GameStop.
From are you playing or are you watching?
Oh, I'm playing. Why?
Oh, that's
on
one.
the PS4.
Oh, like it's really good. I'm like, how's your graphics that good with that old computer? I was like, tripping out right now. I'm like, what?
No, I just have it hooked up to the
Oh, this is the
monitor. Yeah, that's the old one.
Yeah, because I was gonna take some parts out and put it in like another.
You can take it out now if you want.
You're not using it. Right?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
You can just take all the stuff that was on it.
That's when you did on.
Like the bush changing.